I always thought my life was stable, predictable even. Maybe that's where I went wrong. Lucy and I, we were the type of couple that people would point to and say, now that's a solid marriage. At least that's what I believed. As an engineer, I live in a world of numbers and logic, things that make sense. But relationships aren't like that. They're messy, unpredictable, and as I would soon discover full of secrets. It started small. One evening I came home from work, the usual exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. I dropped my bag by the door, greeted Lucy with a kiss on the cheek, and collapsed onto the couch. Lucy was in the kitchen, moving about like she always did, but something was off. Her phone was on the counter, screen lit up with a missed call, a name I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Who doesn't get random calls now and then? But this time, something about the way she quickly grabbed the phone and slid it into her pocket, like she didn't want me to see, gnawed at me. I let it go. At least I told myself I did. But the moment stuck with me, like a splinter lodged in my mind, refusing to be dislodged. I didn't say anything. Not then. Confronting her would have seemed ridiculous. After all, it could have been nothing. But in hindsight, that was the first crack in the foundation, the one I should have noticed. The one that should have set off the alarms. Over the next few weeks, the feeling grew. There was something different about Lucy. She started staying out later than usual, blaming it on work meetings that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. She was on her phone constantly, more than I had ever seen her before, and always with that same furtive glance when I walked into the room as if she was hiding something. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt forced. We had always been close, sharing our days, our thoughts, our frustrations. But lately it was as if Lucy was miles away, even when she was sitting right next to me. Then came the comments. At first they were small, almost insignificant. You're always so wrapped up in your work, Jason. Do you even notice anything anymore? Or, you never want to do anything exciting. Why don't you ever surprise me? I shrugged them off, assuming she was just venting. I knew work had kept me busy, and maybe I had been distant. But soon her words began to cut deeper. I need more from you, she said one night, her eyes cold. You used to be different. Now it's like I'm married to a ghost. I tried to dismiss it, tried to convince myself that every couple goes through rough patches. But the truth was, her words dug into me. They didn't bounce off like they used to. I started to feel like I wasn't enough, like I was somehow failing her, failing us. I didn't like that feeling. I'm not the kind of man who gives in to insecurity easily, but it was hard to ignore the sinking sensation that had taken up residence in my gut. I began to watch her more closely, not in a paranoid way, at least not at first, but just enough to notice the little things. Like how she would laugh at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, or how she started going to the gym more often, though she never came back looking particularly sweaty. The worst part was I couldn't talk to anyone about it. What was I supposed to say? I think my wife might be cheating on me because she's laughing at her phone too much. I'd sound like an idiot, and deep down I still wanted to believe I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid. Then there was that night at the party. It was a company thing, one of those dull affairs where everyone pretends to be interested in each other's lives while secretly counting the minutes until they can leave. Lucy and I went together like we always did, but halfway through the night, I realized she wasn't by my side anymore. I scanned the room searching for her, and then I saw her. She was standing too close to one of the guys from her office, a tall, good-looking guy I vaguely recognized but never really paid attention to. They were laughing, her hand casually resting on his arm. I told myself it was nothing. But as I watched them, something inside me shifted. The way he leaned in, the way she didn't pull back, it all felt too familiar, too intimate. It wasn't just casual flirting. It was more. I tried to brush it off. I didn't want to make a scene. But from that moment on, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The doubt that had been gnawing at me grew stronger, more insistent. Every glance, every touch, every laugh she shared with anyone that wasn't me became suspect. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, the guy who interrogates his wife over every little thing. But I could feel myself slipping, losing my grip on the trust we had built over the years. It all came crashing down a few days later. Lucy was in the shower and I was sitting on the bed staring blankly at the TV. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up with a notification. I tried to ignore it, tried to be the good husband who respects his wife's privacy. But my hand moved on its own, reaching for the phone before I could stop myself. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a harmless message from a friend or something work-related. But when I unlocked the phone and saw the name flashing on the screen, Mark, my stomach dropped. The message was simple. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. My world tilted. I stared at the words, my mind racing to make sense of them. Last night, when had she been with him? My thoughts scattered, trying to piece together the timeline, trying to figure out when she had snuck out, when I had been too blind to see what was right in front of me. Suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, the secretive texts, the cold distance between us, it all clicked into place like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was trying to solve. My hands shook as I put the phone back down, my heart pounding in my chest. When Lucy stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, humming softly to herself, I felt like I was watching a stranger. How could she stand there, so casual, so carefree, when my entire world had just been ripped apart? I wanted to confront her right then, to demand answers, to make her explain, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there silent, the weight of the truth crushing me. I knew in that moment that everything was about to change, but I wasn't ready to face it, not yet. Lucy hummed softly as she walked around the room, oblivious to the storm building inside me. Her casual demeanor, her effortless grace, it all felt like a twisted joke now. How could she act so normal, so carefree, when I knew? But I wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal, and for that, I had to stay quiet. That night, as I lay beside her, the weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me, suffocating. I listened to her breathing, steady and calm, as if she hadn't just shattered my world. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Was our entire life a lie? But beneath the confusion, beneath the sadness, there was something else growing, something darker. Anger. No, it was more than anger. It was a cold, calculated rage, and it wasn't going away. Over the next few days, I watched her more carefully. I had to keep my emotions in check, playing the part of the oblivious husband while she went about her deceit. She didn't seem to notice the subtle changes in my behavior, the way my questions became more pointed, the way my eyes lingered a little too long on her when she wasn't looking. I needed to gather more evidence, more proof, to really understand how deep this betrayal went. Lucy was good, too good at hiding things. She maintained the facade of a loving wife almost flawlessly, but once you start seeing the cracks, you can't unsee them. I noticed how she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, how her explanations about late nights and last-minute work meetings became vaguer, more rehearsed. The small lies were piling up, and I could feel the weight of them crushing whatever remained of our marriage. I couldn't stop thinking about that message from Mark. Who was he really? Was he just some fling, or was there more? My mind couldn't let go of the possibility that she might be planning something bigger, maybe even leaving me. The thought made my stomach churn, but I needed to know for sure. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. It felt like crossing a line, but I couldn't turn back now. I wasn't the type to snoop or pry, but this wasn't just about curiosity. This was about my life, my dignity. If Lucy was lying to me, if she was cheating, then I deserved to know the full truth. I reached out to a PI discreetly, making sure not to leave a trace that could lead back to me. I found a guy who came recommended from a friend, an ex-cop, the kind of man who knew how to stay under the radar. We met in a dingy cafe on the outskirts of town, far enough from any place Lucy or her friends might go. I gave him the basics: Lucy's work schedule, her habits, the sudden changes in her behavior. He didn't ask too many questions, just nodded as I spoke, jotting down notes. "Give me a week," he said, his voice low and confident. "I'll have something for you." I left that meeting with a sense of grim satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. A part of me still hoped I was wrong, that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth, and the truth was going to destroy us. Days passed, each one dragging longer than the last. I kept up appearances, smiling when I needed to, talking about work, pretending to care about trivial things while inside, my thoughts were consumed by the growing web of lies I was untangling. Lucy was none the wiser, carrying on with her routine like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The investigator called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice flat but with an edge that told me what I needed to know before he even spoke the words. "She's been seeing someone," he said. "Regularly." I sat in my car, the engine idling as the words sank in. I felt like I was being punched in the gut, over and over. It wasn't just some fleeting affair. It was serious. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice sounding far away, detached. "His name's Mark," the PI said, confirming what I already suspected. "They've met up a few times over the past month. Hotel rooms. There's more, but I think we should meet in person to go over it." I agreed, setting up a time to meet him the next day. As I hung up the phone, a strange calm washed over me, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. I wasn't surprised, not really. This had been coming for a while, I realized. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now there was no escaping it. Lucy was cheating on me. The woman I had shared my life with for over a decade was sharing herself with someone else. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing but my body moving on autopilot. I replayed every conversation, every moment from the past few months, trying to pinpoint when it had all started to fall apart. Was it that night at the company party? The late work meetings? Or had it been happening long before that, while I was too wrapped up in my own world to notice? That night, Lucy was quieter than usual. She barely looked at me as we ate dinner, her eyes fixed on her phone, her fingers tapping away at the screen. I could feel the distance between us, growing wider with every passing second. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, force her to tell me the truth, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I waited. I waited for the next day, when the PI would hand me the final piece of the puzzle. I would have everything I needed, all the proof laid out in front of me, and then I would confront her. I would make her look me in the eyes and admit what she had done. The next morning, I met the PI in a parking lot, tucked away behind an old warehouse. He handed me a folder, thick with photos and printouts. "This is everything," he said. "Dates, times, places. They've been meeting for at least 6 months, probably longer." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the images. Lucy and Mark in restaurants, in bars, walking into hotel lobbies together. Each photo was a knife to the heart, but I kept flipping through, numb to the pain. There were emails too, printed out from an address I didn't recognize. Messages between Lucy and Mark, making plans, exchanging words that used to belong to us. One message stood out. "I wish I could leave him. It's getting harder to pretend." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. She wasn't just having an affair, she was planning to leave me. She was living a life that didn't include me, making decisions that would rip our family apart, and she hadn't even had the decency to tell me. I stared at the photo of them, standing too close in the shadow of some hotel. They looked happy, comfortable, as if I didn't exist. My hands clenched into fists, crumpling the papers in my lap. All the sadness, all the confusion, it vanished in that moment, replaced by something colder, sharper. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. She had lied to me, cheated on me, and now she was planning to leave me behind like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I had given her everything. My time, my love, my trust, and she had thrown it all away. When I walked back into our house that evening, I felt different, lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Lucy was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, humming the same tune she always did when she cooked. She didn't even look up when I came in. I stood there for a moment watching her, letting the silence stretch between us. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that her perfect little world was about to come crashing down. I could have ended it right there, in that moment. I could have told her I knew everything. But where was the satisfaction in that? No, I wanted her to feel the same pain I had felt. I wanted her to know what it was like to have her life ripped apart piece by piece, and I wasn't going to rush it. I would take my time, make her wonder, make her suffer. She turned to me then, smiling like everything was fine. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light, innocent. I smiled back. "It was fine," I said, my voice steady. "Everything's just fine." And for the first time in weeks, it felt like the truth. The clarity that followed the initial devastation felt like a kind of liberation. I no longer felt crushed under the weight of Lucy's betrayal. Instead, I was driven by something far colder, a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in confusion or heartache. I knew what I had to do. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind churned with plans, possibilities, and every step I needed to take. Lucy's behavior had become so predictable, it was almost laughable. She thought she had me fooled, thought I was still the clueless husband too engrossed in work to notice her lies. But I wasn't that man anymore. She'd made sure of that. I started with the evidence, cataloging every photo, every email, every text the PI had given me. I spread them out across the dining table like a puzzle, piecing together her double life. Every new piece of information added another layer to the picture, and as it came into focus, I felt the slow burn of anger simmer beneath the surface. But I wouldn't act on emotion. That's where most people made mistakes, lashing out in anger and getting sloppy. No, this had to be methodical, precise. The plan formed gradually over the next few days, crystallizing with each new detail I uncovered. I was an engineer, after all, and I knew how to build things. This revenge, it wasn't just about hurting her. It was about dismantling her life in the same way she dismantled mine, piece by piece. First, I needed to gather more ammunition. What I had was damning, but it wasn't enough. Lucy wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave me. And if she left, I'd lose control over the narrative. That couldn't happen. I needed to keep her close for now, to make sure she didn't suspect anything before I was ready. I continued to observe her, staying just out of sight as she slipped into her routine. Late nights at work, hushed phone calls, quick glances at her phone when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The deception had become part of her daily life, woven into every action she took. It was almost admirable how easily she lied. But soon it wouldn't matter how skilled she was at covering her tracks. The truth would catch up with her. Lucy had no idea that while she thought she was pulling the strings, I had already begun pulling them myself. I set up a separate bank account, moved small sums of money over gradually, just enough to avoid raising any red flags. I contacted a divorce attorney under the guise of asking about a friend's situation, gathering all the information I needed to make sure I came out on top when the time came. Financially, she would be devastated, but that wasn't enough. She had to feel it. She had to know what it was like to lose everything, to have the rug pulled out from under her just when she thought she was in control. Lucy's behavior became more erratic as the weeks went on. She started to slip up in small ways, forgetting what lies she'd told, mixing up her excuses, becoming more short-tempered with me. Her guilt, if she felt any, was starting to weigh on her. But instead of easing my suspicion, her outbursts only fueled my resolve. One evening, as we sat in the living room watching TV, she turned to me out of nowhere. "You seem distant lately," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. I kept my expression neutral, playing the role I had perfected over the past few weeks. "Work's been stressful," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my plate right now." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't sure whether to believe me. That uncertainty was exactly what I needed. Let her wonder, let her start to question whether she was still in control. The balance of power was already shifting, but she hadn't realized it yet. That same night, as Lucy lay asleep beside me, I scrolled through her phone. She'd become careless, using the same passcode for everything. It was too easy, really. Her messages with Mark were sickeningly intimate, Plans for future weekends together, talks of leaving me once she figured out how to handle the situation with her lawyer. I could almost laugh at the absurdity of it. Here she was, planning her escape, while I was quietly closing every exit. The next morning, I called the PI again. This time, I wanted more than just evidence of the affair. I wanted to know everything about Mark, who he was, what his weaknesses were. If Lucy was going to burn, so was he. I wouldn't let them walk away from this unscathed. It didn't take long for the PI to dig up everything I needed. Mark was married. Of course he was. His wife, Rebecca, had no idea about the affair, just like me. She was oblivious, living in the same web of lies I had been. The thought of it almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But as soon as I found out about Rebecca, a new layer to my plan emerged. It wasn't enough to just expose Lucy. I needed to use every tool at my disposal to ensure they both paid the price for their betrayal. If Mark's wife found out about the affair, it would create a ripple effect. Lucy wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose him too. And when she had nothing left, when everything she'd built her new life on crumbled, I'd be there to watch it all burn. I arranged a meeting with Rebecca. It had to be careful, subtle. She couldn't know I had anything to do with it. So I sent an anonymous package, photos of Lucy and Mark together, along with a simple note. You deserve to know the truth. Within days, I heard from the PI again. Rebecca had hired him now, tracking Mark's every move. The beauty of it all was that I didn't even need to lift a finger. I had set the pieces in motion, and now I could sit back and watch as their lives unraveled. Lucy continued her affair, blissfully unaware that her world was about to implode. I let her believe she was still in control, that she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. But every time she left the house to meet Mark, I knew. Every time she lied about where she was, I was one step ahead. The tension between us grew, but I kept my composure. I couldn't afford to slip up now. Not when the final stages of my plan were so close to being set in motion. I began siphoning more money into my private account, ensuring that when the divorce hit, I would be financially secure while Lucy floundered. I met with my lawyer again, finalizing every detail. The settlement, the assets, the custody arrangements for our daughter, I had control over it all. Lucy would be left with nothing, just as she deserved. But the real satisfaction would come when everything came to light, when she finally realized how thoroughly I had outplayed her. One evening, Lucy returned home later than usual, her excuses barely coherent. She was unraveling, and it showed. I could see the cracks forming, the stress of juggling her lies starting to wear on her. She glanced at me as she dropped her bag by the door, her eyes searching for something in mine. Did she sense it, the shift in power? Or was she still too blind to see what was coming? Jason, she started, her voice hesitant. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. I stared at her, my face carefully blank. What is it? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated, biting her lip in that way she always did when she was nervous. I've been thinking, maybe we should take some time apart, just to figure things out. It was almost laughable. She was trying to leave me on her terms, to control the narrative, but I wasn't about to let that happen. Time apart, I repeated, tilting my head as if considering it. You think that's what we need? Her relief was almost palpable. She thought I was going to agree, that I'd let her slip away quietly, but I had other plans. I've been thinking the same thing, I continued, watching the hope flare in her eyes. In fact, I think you're right. We do need space. Lucy smiled, clearly believing she was about to get what she wanted. I'm glad you understand, she said, her voice soft. I think it'll be good for us. I returned her smile, though mine was hollow. Yeah, it'll be good. But before we do anything, we should talk about a few things. About Mark. Her face paled, the smile freezing on her lips. For the first time in weeks, she was speechless. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was almost intoxicating. This was just the beginning. I didn't wait long after dropping Mark's name. I needed her to stew in her fear, but not for too long. Just enough for the tension to coil tight inside her, to break down her walls. I wanted her trapped, cornered. What, what do you mean? Lucy stammered, her voice shaking. The color had drained from her face. She clutched the kitchen counter, knuckles turning white. I took a step closer, watching her every reaction with cold calculation. You know exactly what I mean, Lucy. Don't bother denying it. Her eyes widened, darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Jason, it's not what you think. The lies, the excuses, I'd anticipated them. I almost pitied her, watching her scramble to regain control, to manipulate me as she always had. Almost, but not quite. I know about the affair, I said, each word deliberate, slicing through her feeble denials. I know everything, Lucy. About Mark, about the hotels, about your plans to leave me. She froze, her mouth half open, as if caught between wanting to argue and realizing it was pointless. The silence that followed felt like a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. How long? I asked, keeping my voice steady, controlled. How long have you been lying to me? Lucy didn't answer. She couldn't. She was trapped in the lie, tangled in the mess she'd created. I let the silence stretch, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her, suffocating her just as her betrayal had suffocated me. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. 6 months. 6 months. I already knew that, of course, but hearing her admit it, finally, openly, it was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. The truth had been wrung out of her, and now it was my turn to squeeze the rest of the life from this sham of a marriage. 6 months, I repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. And you were just going to leave me, weren't you? You were going to walk out and start over with him. Her silence was the only answer I needed. I let out a sharp breath and turned away, pacing the length of the kitchen to give myself a moment to rein in my emotions. I couldn't let them show now. Not when I was so close to executing my plan. There would be time for fury later. For now, I needed to be cold, calculating, and detached. She watched me, probably expecting a blow-up, an argument, or tears. But there would be none of that. I had no intention of giving her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, she'd get to see something else instead. Her entire life unraveling before her eyes, just like she had planned for mine. Jason, I cut her off with a sharp look. Save it, Lucy. I don't want to hear your excuses. I paused for effect, watching her squirm under my gaze. But there's something you should know. I'm not going to let you just walk away from this. Her expression shifted, a mix of confusion and dread. She didn't understand yet, but she would, soon. I took a step closer, lowering my voice to a deadly calm. I've already filed for divorce. Everything is set. And let's just say, by the time this is over, you'll be lucky to walk away with anything. Lucy's eyes widened in panic, her breath hitching as the reality of her situation began to sink in. What are you talking about? Jason, we can fix this? Fix this? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped my lips. You can't fix this. You've already destroyed everything. I watched her crumble, desperation setting in. She'd thought she could control this, thought she had the upper hand. Now the truth was crashing down on her, and she had no way to stop it. You don't understand, she started again, but I was done listening. It was time to execute the rest of the plan. Over the next week, I initiated small, precise moves to undermine her world. It started with the finances. Lucy had no idea that while she'd been lying to me, I'd been carefully siphoning money out of our joint accounts, moving it into a separate account she couldn't touch. By the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. She noticed the changes slowly at first, small discrepancies in our bank balance, bills that weren't paid on time. I let her sweat, let her think it was just an oversight, until the calls started coming. The credit card company, the mortgage lender. Panic set in as she tried to piece together what was happening, but I made sure to stay one step ahead. Her anxiety grew palpable, especially during her frantic phone calls with Mark, which I overheard thanks to the new recording software I had installed on her phone. It was almost too easy, listening in as she crumbled under the pressure. She didn't realize that I had my hands in every part of her life now, pulling the strings, controlling the chaos she was desperately trying to escape. The next phase was public humiliation, a more dramatic touch I had planned with care. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to watch as her perfect little world burned around her. It happened at a work event, a corporate gala where Lucy had always prided herself on her image, her reputation. She looked flawless that night, dressed in her finest, unaware that the storm was about to hit. I stayed back, blending into the crowd, watching her mingle, laugh, and charm everyone in the room. I waited for the right moment. Timing was everything. When the crowd had settled, I sent the message. A single email, sent to every person at that gala. Photos of her and Mark, intimate, incriminating, along with screenshots of their messages, plans, and declarations of love. I watched the ripple effect as phones buzzed around the room, as people glanced down at their screens. Then back at Lucy, whispers spreading like wildfire. Her face turned ashen when she realized something was wrong, when the people around her stopped smiling, stopped engaging. Confusion morphed into horror as she checked her own phone, the blood draining from her face as she saw the evidence I had meticulously gathered. The look of betrayal, humiliation, and pure terror on her face was everything I had imagined. It was the culmination of all the carefully laid traps, all the small manipulations I had put into place. Lucy's world was unraveling in real time, and she had nowhere to run. I stayed back, letting her squirm, letting her feel the full weight of the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about exposing the affair. This was about ruining her, and I wasn't done yet. Later that night, she confronted me at home, the tension between us thick and suffocating. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling as she stood before me, demanding an explanation, trying to turn the tables. "How could you do this to me?" she choked out, her voice breaking. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone I know." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I didn't do this, Lucy. You did. You destroyed our marriage. I just made sure everyone else saw the truth." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no remorse. She had torn apart my life without a second thought, and now she was paying the price. "It's not that simple," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There are things you don't understand." I narrowed my eyes, my patience thinning. "What could possibly justify what you've done?" She hesitated, glancing away, and I saw the hesitation that told me there was something more. I wasn't sure if I cared, but curiosity got the better of me. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice cold. Lucy took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat before she finally spoke. "I never meant to hurt you, Jason, but there's something I didn't tell you. Something about Mark." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My jaw tightened as I waited for her to continue. He isn't just someone I had an affair with. He's the father of Emily." The world tilted beneath me. I stared at her, unable to process what I just heard. "What did you say?" My voice was barely a whisper, though rage boiled beneath the surface. Lucy's tears spilled over as she nodded. "Mark, he's Emily's biological father. I've been keeping it from you for years, but..." Her voice trailed off, but the damage was done. The cold calculation that had driven me all this time evaporated, replaced by something far darker. I'd destroyed her world, but now she'd destroyed mine. I stood there, my mind a fog of disbelief, barely registering Lucy's sobs. Emily, our daughter, my daughter, wasn't mine. Every ounce of control I had clung to in these past few weeks slipped, and in its place surged a tidal wave of anger and pain so raw, so visceral, I could barely breathe. "You're lying," I managed, my voice hoarse, though deep down I knew she wasn't. She wouldn't make up something like this, not now. Lucy's shoulders shook as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words rang hollow, echoing in the cavernous space between us. Hurt me? She'd already done that. This was obliteration. Everything I thought I knew, every memory, every moment I had cherished with Emily, It was all tainted now, stained by this revelation. A lie woven so tightly into the fabric of my life that I didn't even see the threads unraveling until they had already come apart. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold, calculated. I needed facts now, the numbers, the hard truth. No more lies, no more emotion. Lucy looked up at me, her face pale, eyes red and swollen. "Since the beginning," she whispered. "Mark and we were together before you and I even started dating. I didn't know I was pregnant when we got married." The words fell like stones into the pit of my stomach. This betrayal wasn't just recent. It had been there, lurking for years. She'd never planned on telling me. All this time, I had raised Emily, loved her as if she were my own, while Lucy had kept this secret buried. How could she? I didn't respond. I couldn't. The storm inside me churned, threatening to pull me under, but I refused to let it show. I wouldn't break in front of her. Not now. Lucy stepped forward, reaching for me, her fingers trembling. "Jason, please. We can work through this. I still love you. We can—" "Don't!" I snapped, stepping back, the venom in my voice silencing her instantly. "Don't you dare touch me." My hands clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms until the pain grounded me, kept me from spiraling out of control. Her expression crumbled, the last sliver of hope in her eyes flickering out. She knew. She knew I was beyond forgiveness, beyond any reconciliation. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't know how." "Bullshit." The words snapped out of me before I could stop it. "You were never going to tell me. You were going to let me keep believing Emily was mine, keep pretending this family was real, all along while you snuck off with him behind my back." Lucy shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not like that, Jason. I love Emily. You love her." She's not mine," I growled, the finality of it hitting me like a punch to the gut. "And you made sure I'd never know, didn't you?" Silence settled between us, heavy, suffocating. My mind raced, sifting through the years, every milestone, every birthday, every moment I had with Emily, every moment I thought we had as a family. All of it, gone, reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye. Lucy stood there, broken, her shoulders hunched in defeat. She had no more excuses, no more lies. Just the brutal truth left between us, and it was enough to destroy everything. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside, oblivious to the devastation happening in this room. "I'm leaving," I said finally, the decision crystallizing in my mind with chilling clarity. It wasn't a threat or a statement made in anger. It was a simple fact. I wasn't going to stay here and continue living this lie. Lucy's breath hitched. "Jason, please don't." "You destroyed this, Lucy," I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You destroyed us. There's no going back from this." I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of what we once had. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next few days passed in a blur, the numbness settling in as I moved through the motions. I stayed at a hotel far from the house, from her. I couldn't bear the sight of her, the thought of what she had done. But my mind, ever analytical, never stopped. The plan still needed to be executed. There was no turning back now, no matter how much deeper this betrayal cut. If anything, it only fueled my resolve. Lucy's affair was one thing. This was something else entirely. She hadn't just betrayed me as a husband. She had shattered everything I believed about myself as a father. And for that, there could be no mercy. The first call I made was to Mark's wife, Rebecca. I had hesitated before, uncertain if dragging her into this mess was necessary. But now I didn't care. She deserved to know the truth, just like I had. "Rebecca," I said when she answered, her voice cautious. "It's Jason. We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, long and tense. "What's this about?" she finally asked, her tone wary. "It's about your husband and Lucy." Another pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "What about them?" I told her everything. Every sordid detail, every lie, every betrayal. I didn't hold back. She deserved the truth just as much as I had. And when I was finished, the silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "I'll handle it," she said finally, her voice cold, detached. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Good." I hung up, the satisfaction that usually followed these steps now dulled by the weight of what had been revealed. But it didn't matter. The plan was in motion, and I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to the final blow. The following week, I made the final preparations. Lucy, still oblivious to the full extent of what was coming, was now completely unraveling. Her job was hanging by a thread after the scandal at the gala, and Mark had been distancing himself, likely feeling the pressure from his own crumbling marriage. She tried to reach out to me, tried to beg for forgiveness, but I ignored her. I didn't care about her apologies anymore. I was done with her lies, done with her manipulations. On the day of Emily's school recital, an event Lucy had been looking forward to for weeks, I made my move. I arrived at the auditorium early, slipping into the back row unnoticed. I watched as Lucy walked in with Emily, holding her hand, smiling at the other parents as if everything was fine. But it wasn't. It was far from fine. As the performance began, I slipped out my phone and sent the final email. This one wasn't just to her colleagues or friends. It was to her family, her parents, her siblings, everyone who mattered to her. I watched her face as the messages started to come in. One by one, her phone buzzed, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. She fumbled with the device, her hands shaking as she read the messages. Photos of her and Mark, screenshots of their conversations. The truth laid bare for everyone to see. She glanced around the room, panic setting in as she realized there was no escape this time. The people around her, the ones she had deceived, were all starting to whisper, to stare. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I stayed in the shadows, watching it all unfold. The humiliation, the despair, it was everything I had planned for, everything I had wanted. And yet, as I watched her crumble, I felt nothing. The recital ended, and as the other parents congratulated their children, Lucy stood alone, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked around, her eyes searching for me, but I was already gone. I walked out of the auditorium, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. It was over. I had done it. Lucy's life was in ruins, just as she had ruined mine. But as I stood there, staring out at the empty street, a strange emptiness settled over me. I had won. I had destroyed her, but the victory felt hollow, like ash in my mouth. I thought back to the night I first discovered her betrayal, the burning need for revenge that had consumed me, driven me. And now, with her life in shambles, I realized something I hadn't expected. Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't brought closure. It had only left me with the same gaping wound, festering and raw. I thought destroying Lucy's life would feel like triumph, but as I stood outside the auditorium, watching the world move on without knowing the chaos I had just unleashed, I felt nothing. The cold wind whipped through me, but it didn't shake the numbness that had settled deep inside. Lucy was ruined, and everything I had worked toward, every step, every calculated move, had come to fruition. Yet here I was, hollow, a man emptied of whatever had driven me to this point. I left the city the next morning. I couldn't stay, not with the wreckage of my life so close. The hotel room I had been staying in felt like a tomb, suffocating me with memories of the last few weeks. I needed space, distance, somewhere I could think, could figure out what came next. The revenge was done. Lucy had nothing left. Her reputation, her career, even her family. But what did I have? I spent the next few days in a small, nondescript town where no one knew me, where the past couldn't follow. It was quiet, almost peaceful. I walked the streets aimlessly, lost in my own mind. The people here seemed untouched by the kind of betrayal I had lived through, their lives simple, unburdened. I envied them. Every night as I lay in bed, the same thought gnawed at me. Now what? Revenge had consumed me for so long that without it I felt directionless. There was no satisfaction in Lucy's downfall. It hadn't filled the void she had left. Instead, it had created a new one, deeper and more insidious. I couldn't stop thinking about Emily, my daughter, except she wasn't, not biologically anyway. But the years I had spent raising her, loving her, they couldn't just be erased by a truth Lucy had kept hidden. I wanted to hate Emily, to push her away like I had pushed Lucy, but I couldn't. She wasn't responsible for any of this. She was innocent, caught in the web of lies Lucy had spun. And yet, every time I thought of her, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. How could I go back to her, knowing what I knew now? One evening, after a week of silence, I received a text. It was from Lucy. "I'm leaving the house tomorrow. You can come by and get your things if you want. I won't be there. Emily will be at school." That was it. No apology, no further explanation, just cold logistics as if she had already moved on from the wreckage of our lives. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to never see that house again, but another part of me, perhaps the part that still wanted closure, compelled me to return. I had to see the place one last time, to say goodbye to the life that was now nothing but a lie. I drove back to the house early the next morning, the sky still dark, the streets deserted. The house loomed in front of me, a monument to everything that had fallen apart. I walked inside, the silence oppressive. The place felt empty, not just because Lucy had taken some of her things, but because it no longer felt like home. It was just a shell now, a reminder of what I had lost. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with ghosts of the past. The kitchen, where we had once laughed and cooked together. The living room, where we'd watched Emily take her first steps. Our bedroom, where I had discovered the first message that had started this whole nightmare. Every corner of the house held memories, and now they were all tainted. As I was packing up my things, I found an envelope on the dining room table. My name was scrawled on the front in Lucy's handwriting. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to read whatever was inside, but curiosity or perhaps some lingering need for closure got the better of me. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words were shaky as if written in haste or desperation. "Jason, I know there's nothing I can say to undo what I've done. I won't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago. Emily wasn't an accident. I knew I was pregnant with Mark's child when we got married, but I married you because I loved you. I still do. I didn't choose you because I was trying to hide the truth or because I wanted an easy way out. I chose you because you were the only man who ever made me feel safe, the only man who made me believe in something better. I thought I could live with the lie, that I could protect you from the truth. But the truth has a way of catching up, doesn't it? I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. I kept the secret because I was afraid of losing you, and now I've lost everything anyway. Emily loves you, Jason. You've been her father in every way that matters. Don't let what I did take that away from her. She needs you, even if you don't need me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you'll understand why I did what I did. I never meant for it to end like this. Lucy." I stared at the letter for a long time, her words sinking in. She had chosen me, not because of a lie, but despite it. It didn't change what she had done, didn't erase the betrayal, but it added a layer of complexity I hadn't been prepared for. She had loved me, even if she had loved him too. The question that lingered in the air, unspoken, was whether I had truly loved her or whether I had simply been in love with the idea of the life we had built together. Had I been blind to the cracks just as much as she had been blind to the truth? I folded the letter and placed it back on the table, my mind whirling with thoughts I couldn't yet organize. Revenge had been my driving force for so long that I didn't know how to process anything else. Lucy was gone from my life, but Emily was still there. And she was the only thing that felt real anymore. I left the house without taking much. Just a few boxes of clothes, some personal items. The rest I didn't need. It was part of a life I no longer wanted. As I drove away, the letter weighed heavily in my mind, the words echoing over and over. "You've been her father in every way that matters." Had I? Could I still be? For the first time in weeks, I didn't think about Lucy or the revenge that had consumed me. I thought about Emily, the little girl who had called me daddy since she could first speak. The little girl who I had held in my arms when she was sick, who I had taught to ride a bike, who I had tucked into bed every night for the last 7 years. Biology didn't matter, blood didn't matter. What mattered was the bond we had, the love I had for her. And nothing Lucy had done could take that away. I had been her father all these years, and I still was. That was one truth I couldn't deny. As I drove toward the school to pick her up, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. The revenge hadn't brought me peace, but maybe something else could. Maybe rebuilding, starting over, didn't mean erasing the past, but learning to live with it. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever fully move on from what Lucy had done. But I knew one thing: Emily was still my daughter, and that was enough for now. The scars of the last few weeks would linger, but I could feel the weight beginning to lift. I had been consumed by darkness, but maybe, just maybe, there was still light ahead.